Charleston, South Carolina, 1978. Bob Marley and his band walked into Magnolia's restaurant after a sold-out concert. They were hungry, exhausted, and looking forward to a quiet meal. What happened next would shut down an entire city block and force a restaurant to make a choice: apologize or go out of business. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music's most incredible moments, hit that subscribe button. The maitre d' took one look at Bob's band: 7 black musicians, dreadlocks, stage clothes, and his face went cold. "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but we're fully booked tonight." Bob glanced inside. Half the tables were empty. "It looks like you have plenty of space, brother." The maitre d' shifted uncomfortably. "Those tables are all reserved." Bob's keyboardist, Tyrone, recognized what was happening immediately. "Reserved for who?" The maitre d' didn't answer. Bob looked down at his clean shirt, jeans, and denim jacket. Nothing inappropriate. Just not what this restaurant wanted to see. "What's your name?" Bob asked the maitre d' quietly. "Richard." "Richard, I'm Bob Marley. We just performed for thousands of people in your city tonight, black people, white people, all together. And now you're telling us we can't eat in your restaurant?" Richard's face flushed. "Sir, it's not about that." "Then what is it about?" Richard couldn't answer. The restaurant manager, Thomas Whitmore, appeared. "I know who you are, Mr. Marley. This is a private establishment. We serve a certain clientele. Your style doesn't match what our customers expect." There it was. Raw discrimination wrapped in polite words. Bob's band members bristled. Junior Marvin started to respond, but Bob put a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Whitmore," Bob said, his voice calm as still water. "At least you told the truth. That's more than most do." Bob turned to his band. "Come. We don't need to eat here." They walked out into the warm Charleston night. The restaurant door closed behind them, and that's when Bob made a decision that would change everything. "Set up the equipment," Bob said. His band members looked at him, confused. "What equipment?" Tyrone asked. "The acoustic guitars, the small amp. We have it in the van, right?" Junior started to smile. He understood. "Bob, you're not serious." "I'm very serious," Bob said, walking toward their tour van parked on the street. "They say we're not welcome in their restaurant? Fine, we'll play right here, on the sidewalk. Let's see what happens." Within 10 minutes, Bob and 3 band members had set up on the sidewalk in front of Magnolia's. Bob sat on an amp, guitar across his lap. It was nearly midnight. Bob started playing "No Woman, No Cry." His voice carried into the Charleston night, soft at first, then stronger. A couple walking past stopped immediately. "Is that Bob Marley?" the woman whispered. "No way, can't be." But it was. Within 5 minutes, a small crowd had formed. Within 10 minutes, that crowd had doubled. By the time Bob finished the first song, over 50 people surrounded him, sitting on the sidewalk, standing in the street, leaning against buildings. Bob didn't address the crowd. He just kept playing. "Redemption Song" next. Then "Three Little Birds." The crowd sang along, swaying, some crying. Word spread fast in 1978, not through social media, but through something more powerful. People calling friends from payphones, running to neighbors' houses, shouting down the street. Inside Magnolia's restaurant, Thomas Whitmore watched through the window, his expression darkening. His remaining dinner guests were distracted, getting up from their tables to look outside. This wasn't the quiet, exclusive dining experience he'd promised. This was chaos. He walked outside, furious. "Mr. Marley, you're creating a public disturbance. I'm calling the police." Bob kept playing, didn't even look up. Junior Marvin, standing beside Bob, responded instead. "We're on a public sidewalk. We're not breaking any laws. We're just making music." By now, over 200 people had gathered. Cars were slowing down. Some were stopping completely, blocking traffic. Bob started playing "Get Up, Stand Up." The crowd erupted, singing every word with him. The police arrived, 2 patrol cars. Officer James Morrison stepped out, assessed the situation, and immediately recognized Bob Marley. Morrison had been at the concert earlier that night with his daughter. He'd watched 12,000 people united by music. And now here was Bob, sitting on an amp on a Charleston sidewalk at midnight, surrounded by hundreds of people. "Mr. Marley," Officer Morrison said carefully, "we got a complaint about a noise disturbance." Bob stopped playing, looked at Morrison. "Are we being too loud, officer?" Morrison looked at the crowd. Black people, white people, old and young, all sitting peacefully, singing together. He looked at the restaurant manager standing in the doorway, arms crossed, face red. Morrison made a decision. "Actually, Mr. Marley, I don't hear a disturbance. I hear music, beautiful music, but you're blocking traffic. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to close this block for the next hour. Keep playing." Thomas Whitmore exploded. "Officer, you can't be serious. This is affecting my business." Morrison turned to him, his voice cold. "Your business? Mr. Whitmore, you turned away one of the most famous musicians in the world because of the color of his skin. That's what's affecting your business. Now step back inside before I find a reason to cite you for something." Bob smiled and started playing again. By now, over 500 people had gathered. The police had to close down 2 full blocks. Local news crews arrived. Someone had called the Charleston Post and Courier. A photographer started snapping pictures. This impromptu sidewalk concert was becoming news. Bob played for another 40 minutes. One Love. Jamming. Exodus. Between songs, he talked to the crowd. "You know why I'm playing here tonight? Because they told us we weren't welcome in that restaurant. They looked at my brothers and saw something they didn't like. Our skin, our hair, our style. But music doesn't see color. Music doesn't care about your style. Music sees your soul." The crowd cheered. Inside Magnolia's, Thomas Whitmore watched his nightmare unfold. Every remaining customer had left, not to avoid the music, but to join it. His staff stood at the windows, watching, some clearly moved by what they were seeing. The restaurant was empty except for Thomas and Richard, the maitre d', who looked deeply uncomfortable. "Sir," Richard said quietly, "maybe we should reconsider." "Reconsider what?" Thomas snapped. "Our policy. This doesn't feel right." Thomas didn't respond. He just watched through the window as Bob Marley, sitting on an amplifier on the sidewalk his restaurant had rejected him from, created magic that his expensive dining room never could. But here's where the story takes its most important turn. A young woman in the crowd, probably 19 or 20, started crying. Really crying, Bob noticed. He stopped mid-song. "Sister, what's wrong?" The crowd went quiet. The girl, named Lisa, stood up. "Mr. Marley, I work in that restaurant. I'm a waitress. I was there when they turned you away. I heard what Mr. Whitmore said. And I'm so sorry. I'm so ashamed." Bob set down his guitar, stood up, and walked to her. "Why are you ashamed? You didn't turn us away." "But I work there," Lisa said. "I take their money. That makes me part of it." Bob took her hands. "No, sister. Being there doesn't make you part of the hate. But being here, standing with us, that's a choice. That's courage. Don't be ashamed. Be proud. You're choosing love over a paycheck. That's powerful." Lisa broke down completely. Bob hugged her. The crowd applauded. And inside the restaurant, Richard the maitre d' made his own decision. He took off his uniform jacket, walked outside, and joined the crowd. Thomas Whitmore stood alone in his empty restaurant, watching his staff, his former customers, and half of Charleston choose Bob Marley's sidewalk over his dining room. The local news that night led with the story, "Bob Marley performs impromptu concert after restaurant discrimination." The story went national by morning. By noon the next day, protesters had surrounded Magnolia's restaurant. Not angry protesters, peaceful ones. They sang Bob Marley songs. They held signs. Music has no color, and Magnolia's chooses hate. Thomas Whitmore's phone rang constantly. Reservation cancellations. Corporate partners pulling out. His landlord calling about the negative publicity. By 6 p.m., less than 24 hours after turning Bob Marley away, Magnolia's restaurant was facing financial ruin. At 7:30 p.m., Thomas did something he never thought he'd do. He called Bob's tour manager. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Marley." "Mr. Whitmore, I don't think—" "Please, I need to apologize. Publicly." 2 hours later, Thomas Whitmore stood on the same sidewalk where Bob had played the night before. News cameras were there. A small crowd had gathered, and Bob Marley stood beside him. Thomas spoke, his voice shaking. "Last night, I made the worst decision of my life. I turned away Mr. Marley and his band because of prejudice, ignorance, and hatred that I was raised with but should have left behind long ago. I humiliated good men. I disgraced my business. And I hurt my community." He turned to Bob. "Mr. Marley, I cannot undo what I did, but I can promise you this. Magnolia's restaurant will never discriminate again. We're implementing new policies, diversity training for all staff, and partnering with local civil rights organizations. And if you would honor us, I'd like to offer you and your entire band a meal. On the house. Not to buy your forgiveness, but to begin making amends." The crowd watched silently. Bob looked at Thomas for a long moment. "Mr. Whitmore, I accept your apology. Not because I have to, but because growth requires we give people the chance to change. My band and I will come to your restaurant. But not for a free meal. We'll pay. Because equality isn't a favor. It's a right." The crowd erupted in applause. That night, Bob Marley and his band ate at Magnolia's restaurant. Thomas Whitmore served them personally. Richard, the maitre d', apologized to each band member individually. Lisa, the waitress who'd cried at the concert, quit her job that night, but Thomas convinced her to stay, making her the restaurant's new diversity coordinator. The story didn't end there. Magnolia's restaurant became known as the place that Bob Marley changed. They hung a framed photo in the entrance. Bob sitting on that amp, playing guitar on the sidewalk. Beneath it, a plaque. "On this spot, Bob Marley taught us that love is louder than hate. May we never forget." Years later, in an interview, Bob reflected on that night. "People ask me why I didn't just find another restaurant. Why sit on a sidewalk and make a scene? But that's the thing. Injustice thrives in silence. When you walk away quietly, nothing changes. When you stand up, even peacefully, even just with a guitar and your voice, you force people to see. And sometimes, being seen is the first step to being heard." Thomas Whitmore ran Magnolia's for another 15 years. He became an advocate for civil rights in Charleston, speaking at schools and churches about his transformation. "I was raised to see people by their color," he'd tell audiences. "Bob Marley taught me to see them by their character. That night cost me customers, money, and pride, but it gave me back my humanity." Lisa, the waitress, eventually became a civil rights attorney. In her college application essay, she wrote about watching Bob Marley turn discrimination into a concert and hate into hope. "That night showed me that silence is complicity. Speaking up, even when it costs you everything, is the only choice worth making." Officer Morrison, who closed the street and let Bob play, later said it was the best decision of his career. "I could have shut it down. I could have arrested people for blocking traffic. But sometimes, you have to recognize when something bigger than the law is happening. That was a moment of grace. I wasn't going to interrupt grace." Today, that block of Charleston is marked with a historic plaque, not about the restaurant, but about the concert. On this spot, September 21, 1978, Bob Marley performed an impromptu concert after being denied service due to racial discrimination. His peaceful response transformed a moment of hate into a movement of love. Every year on that date, local musicians gather on that sidewalk and play Bob Marley songs. Hundreds attend. And Magnolia's restaurant, still operating today under new ownership, sponsors the event. Bob Marley died in 1981, but the lesson from that Charleston sidewalk lives on. When faced with hate, he didn't respond with violence. He didn't even respond with anger. He responded with music, with love, with the simple act of being so undeniably excellent that people couldn't look away. And in looking, they had to choose: stay inside with hate or step outside with hope.